The story of King Saul is a tale as old as time. It is a story of ambition, of faith, and ultimately, of tragedy. Saul was a man chosen by God, plucked from obscurity and made the first king of Israel. He was tall, strong, a natural leader who inspired his people. He led them to victories, uniting the tribes of Israel against their enemies. But power, like the sun, can cast dark shadows. Across the valley, a new enemy gathered strength: the Philistines. They were a fearsome people, skilled in warfare and hungry for Israelite land. The Philistines represented chaos, a threat to the newfound stability of Israel. Their iron chariots and experienced soldiers made them a formidable foe, a constant danger to the Israelites. The very existence of Israel was at stake. The final confrontation took place on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. This was not just any battle, it was a clash that would determine the fate of nations. The air was thick with tension as both armies prepared for the inevitable conflict. The Israelites, led by King Saul, stood on one side, their faces grim with determination. On the other side, the Philistines, fierce and relentless, were ready to bring their full might to bear. The Philistine and Israelite armies clashed in a brutal battle. Swords clanged, shields shattered, and the ground trembled under the weight of the fighting. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of war cries, the clash of metal and the screams of the wounded. Each side fought with a ferocity born of desperation, knowing that the outcome of this battle would shape the future of their people. Arrows filled the sky, their deadly rain blotting out the sun. The archers on both sides were relentless, their bows singing as they released volley after volley. The sky seemed to darken as the arrows flew, a deadly storm that showed no mercy. Warriors on the ground raised their shields, trying to protect themselves from the lethal barrage, but many fell, struck down by the unrelenting hail of arrows. The ground was soon littered with the bodies of fallen warriors. The once green slopes of Mount Gilboa were now stained with blood, a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. The fallen lay where they had fought, their weapons still clutched in their hands. The cries of the dying mingled with the sounds of battle, creating a haunting symphony of suffering and death. The cries of the wounded filled the air, a symphony of suffering. Soldiers, both Philistine and Israelite, lay on the ground, their bodies broken and bleeding. Some called out for help, others for their loved ones, and some simply screamed in agony. The battlefield had become a place of unimaginable horror, where the living envied the dead. The tide of the battle turned against Israel. Despite their bravery and determination, the Israelites were being pushed back. The Philistines, sensing victory, pressed their advantage, their attacks becoming even more ferocious. King Saul and his sons fought valiantly, but it was clear that the battle was slipping away from them. The Israelite lines began to falter, and panic started to spread among the ranks. Fear began to grip the hearts of even the bravest Israelite soldiers. The sight of their comrades falling, the relentless advance of the Philistines, and the realization that they might not survive the day filled them with dread. Some began to flee, hoping to escape the carnage, while others stood their ground, determined to fight to the end. The Battle of Gilboa was a turning point, a moment of both great heroism and profound tragedy. Jonathan, Saul's son, was a beacon of hope amidst the carnage. Born into a time of relentless conflict, he grew up with the sounds of battle as his lullaby and the sight of bloodshed as his daily reality. Despite the chaos, Jonathan emerged as a symbol of bravery and resilience. His presence on the battlefield was not just a testament to his skill, but also to his unwavering spirit. He was a skilled warrior, loved by his men and respected even by his enemies. His leadership was marked by a rare combination of strength and compassion. Jonathan's men followed him not out of fear, but out of genuine respect and admiration. They knew that under his command, they were not just soldiers, but brothers in arms. His enemies, too, could not help but acknowledge his prowess and honor on the battlefield. Jonathan fought with the courage of a lion, his loyalty to his father and his nation unquestioned. Every charge he led was a testament to his dedication and valor. He was often seen at the forefront of the battle, his sword gleaming under the sun, his battle cry echoing through the fields. His bravery was not just in his actions, but in his unwavering commitment to his people and his cause. But even the bravest can fall. In the heat of battle, amidst the clashing of swords and the cries of the wounded, Jonathan's fate took a tragic turn. The chaos of war spares no one. and even the mightiest warriors are vulnerable to its indiscriminate wrath. Jonathan, struck by a Philistine arrow, lay dead on the battlefield. His fall was not just the loss of a warrior, but the extinguishing of a bright light that had guided many. The arrow that struck him down was a cruel reminder of the fragility of life, even for those who seem invincible. His lifeless body on the battlefield was a stark contrast to the vibrant leader he once was. His loss was a devastating blow to Saul, a wound that cut deeper than any sword. The king's grief was palpable, a heavy burden that weighed down his heart. Jonathan was not just his son, but his confidant, his pride, and his hope for the future. The battlefield, once a place of glory and honor, now felt like a graveyard of shattered dreams. Saul's sorrow was a testament to the profound bond they shared, a bond that even death could not sever. Section 5. A king's desperation. Saul, witnessing the slaughter of his men and the death of his son, was overcome with despair. The battlefield was a grim sight, littered with the bodies of brave soldiers who had fought valiantly but ultimately fell to the enemy's sword. The air was thick with the stench of death and the cries of the wounded. Saul's heart ached as he saw the lifeless body of his beloved son Jonathan among the fallen. The weight of his failure pressed heavily upon him, and he felt an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. His heart, once filled with the fire of God, now turned cold with fear. The confidence and strength that had once defined him were now replaced by a deep-seated terror. He could feel the presence of God slipping away, leaving him vulnerable and alone. The memories of his past victories seemed like distant echoes, overshadowed by the crushing reality of his present defeat. Saul's mind raced with thoughts of what could have been. Had he not strayed from the path of righteousness, he had lost the favor of God, his disobedience echoing in the silence of his despair. Kneeling in prayer, Saul sought solace in the divine, but the heavens remained silent. His past transgressions haunted him, each act of disobedience replaying in his mind like a relentless torment. The once mighty king who had been chosen by God to lead his people now found himself abandoned and forsaken. The weight of his sins bore down on him, and he could not escape the crushing guilt that consumed his soul. He looked around at the carnage, the defeat of his army, and saw the face of his own failure reflected back at him. The battlefield, once a place of glory and honor, was now a desolate wasteland, a testament to his shortcomings as a leader. The sight of his men retreating in defeat was a bitter reminder of the consequences of his actions. Saul's heart was heavy with regret, and he knew that he had brought this devastation upon himself and his people. As he surveyed the scene, he realized that his legacy would be one of sorrow and loss, a stark contrast to the greatness he had once aspired to achieve. Section 6. The tragic choice. Wounded and filled with despair, Saul made a fateful decision. He fell upon his own sword, choosing death over capture and humiliation. The first king of Israel, chosen by God, met his end by his own hand. It was a tragic end to a reign that began with such promise. His death was a symbol of his broken spirit, his inability to face the consequences of his actions. Section 7. Desecration and courage. The Philistines, upon discovering Saul's body, desecrated it, taking his armor and hanging his body on the walls of their city. This act, meant to humiliate the Israelites, only fueled their anger and determination, but courage still flickered in the hearts of a few. The men of Jabesh Gilead, remembering Saul's kindness, risked their lives to retrieve his body and give him a proper burial. Section 8. The sins of the king. Saul's tragic end was not a random act of fate, it was a consequence of his own choices. He had disobeyed God, letting pride and fear guide his actions. He consulted a medium, seeking forbidden knowledge instead of turning to God. His story is a reminder that even those chosen by God are not above consequence. Section 9. A new dawn. With Saul's death, the throne of Israel passed to David, a young shepherd chosen by God. David, a man after God's own heart, would usher in a new era of prosperity for Israel. Saul's reign, though ending in tragedy, served as a harsh lesson for the Israelites. It reminded them that leadership demanded obedience to God and that even kings were not above the divine law.